Got a question on TikTok asking about giving advice or some thoughts about how to terminate a tenant's month-to-month tenancy. I guess the tenants have been living there for 6 years. They're not maintaining the property. Hi, my name is Rob Wells. I'm the Landlord War on TikTok and YouTube. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to our videos. Now, there's a few things that we need to unpack here, okay? There could be a couple of different options, okay? When anyone, landlord comes to my office and there's a problem, I got to try to find out what the problem is and be real specific about what the actual problem is. Maintaining a property, for example, it could be a number of things. It could be the tenants are keeping the property in the interior of the property in an unclean and unsafe manner, okay? Just think of like a kind of like a hoarding type situation. Let's say that situation is causing like bugs, rodents, vermin, that type of deal, and it's going to other tenants, okay? We have that type of like not maintaining the property, which would be actionable probably as a nuisance in most written rental agreements. Any agreement worth its salt should have some type of term of, keeping the place clean and sanitary. But even if you didn't have a lease term, it would possibly be, that could possibly be addressed as a nuisance, particularly if it's harming someone, okay? You might have a provision that says, you're to maintain the landscaping, for example, and the tenants aren't doing that. Well, that might be a breach of material terms of the lease, if that's actually in the lease agreement. So it kind of depends what the actual issue is, if there's express lease term in the lease, and even if it's in the lease term, is it material, okay? And someone like myself or another landlord's attorney is going to have to kind of dig into the facts, okay? Now, for all those that are, the second layer of the onion trying to pull apart this question is, okay, are you subject to local just cause eviction requirements? For example, many landlords in California, mom and pops, that have a properly executed Tenant Protection Act exemption saying that, they own a single dwelling or they're exempt under the Tenants Protection Act, may just be able to just give a 60-day notice with no cause or legal reason listed in it, and because you're just tired of what the tenant is doing. That might be an option as well. But that's going to vary from city or county depending on where your property is at, where the tenancy is at, because you might be subject to the state's Tenants Protection Act of 2019. You might be subject to a local eviction control ordinance, basically, that type of deal. So my thoughts about this, to help this viewer out and other viewers like this, is to kind of gather what the actual problems are, right? So you can tell legal counsel what's going on, and also too, having a written lease or your written rental agreement and finding out what terms that the tenant might be violating. And in many cases it's fairly obvious, but it might be a particular type of term of tenancy. And then for some landlords that might not have like lease terms whatsoever that are addressing the issue, it might be a possibility of adding additional terms and changing terms of tenancy to add an additional term to clear up any misunderstandings or issues with the lease. So that might be a possibility. So without further information, it's kind of hard for me to gauge, like what you can do to terminate that tenancy, although there might be several options available to either give a 60 day notice to vacate. This tenant's lived there for more than a year. For tenancies that the tenant hasn't lived there for 12 months, you might be able to give a 30-day notice. You might be able to do a 3-day notice to perform, warning the tenants like you need to, fix this issue or your tenancy is going to be terminated. But your mileage is going to vary based on those factors. So, folks, if you're in the Northern California area and you need help with this, figuring out what you can and can't do, feel free to reach out. We might be able to help out. Put your comments, questions down below. Until next time, folks, I'll talk to you then. Thanks.